You hit start right.
I did.
Jim, how are you?
Good. So,
It's been a long time.
yeah.
Waiting.
Last time I saw you were down in Texas playing Rackspace.
There you go. Got out of there, and now I just hang out and talk to PowerShell people. So. Good times.
Waiting.
Last time I saw you were down in Cincy. All right. We're
There you go. Got out of there, and now I just hang out and talk to PowerShell people.
All right. If for those of you that joined the stream,
There you go.
it should be stopped. I'm looking to see where it is. Where is it?
It should be my audio. It's not my audio that's coming through.
So is your machine on the wired network or something?
I did the
What does this look to? Did you open it up over here?
Christina, if the wireless is wireless isolated. Yeah. Like with his host be able to.
Yeah, should be able to. Okay, I think that should have fixed it. Sorry, we're working through some technical kinks here. We are going to have a couple demos before we actually get started with Shane. We're just getting those set up right now. We should be able to start here in a few minutes. If you have any questions, just direct them to the chat, or you can also join us in the Google Hangout. We can send that link in the chat. Okay, just a couple more minutes here, and we'll have a demo here by Zach. So for those of you that are new and haven't joined us before, welcome to Cincinnati PowerShell User Group. We try to meet every single month and have topics that are relevant to PowerShell, automation, DevOps, and just kind of tailor it for IT pros and people that are learning and also that are sort of experts at this. We have a wide variety of people that come and contribute things. So thank you all for coming out. If you have any questions, you can join our Google Hangout link. We tweeted it out, and it's also in the chat here on the live stream, or you can chat your questions to us. We are monitoring that, and we'll try to get it answered for you. So just a couple more minutes here, and we should be ready to do our demo. You there? Okay.
So sound works?
Yep. Okay. So this is Zach. He's gonna give us a demo of some cool stuff he's been working on.
Okay. About a year ago, I was working with a customer that upgraded their printers. They got some Sharp printers that had multiple printer trays, and the way this customer operates, all their employees, they work from home, and they do all their work on a Microsoft terminal server, and they print using Microsoft redirected printers. And whenever they got these printers, they weren't able to utilize the trays of the printers in the redirected printer due to the security. I'll show you why that was. Okay, so my workstation is remote desktoped into a 2016 terminal server, and I have the Easy Print driver off. Are you guys familiar with the Easy Print driver? No? Are you familiar with, does anyone not know what a redirected printer is?
Can you just explain it real quick?
Okay, I'll explain it. So whenever you remote into a computer, it's possible to print to your local printer. So your local printer shows up on the remote server as a redirected printer. Like this printer here is a redirected printer. It shows up as the name of the printer.
I'm familiar with it, I just know the terminology.
Okay. So and the Easy Print driver, it's a generic driver that's used to get a print job quick to the printer, but it doesn't always work. Sometimes it renders the print job incorrectly. So I have it off on this test machine, and I have the vendor driver installed. So it's not using the Easy Print driver, it's using the vendor driver. And whenever you go into configure some print options for this printer, like these trays here, they're grayed out. And the reason for that is because of the default redirected printer security system is the only user that has security, that has full access to this printer. If you go to, I'm logged in as administrator. Administrator just has special permissions. It doesn't have the ability to manage this printer. So I wrote a script that gives you the ability to rename a redirected printer, and it also recreates the redirected printer with full security. And I wrote this because mainly because they weren't able to utilize all the trays of the printer. So I'll show you how to install the script. I have it on GitHub. And I made it real easy to install. At the bottom of the page, I used WinRAR to extract all the stuff for the script, and then execute a script after extracting it to put it all in the correct place. So we'll download it and run it. Okay, the script's installed and now it just launched. On the GitHub page, I have some instructions on how to install it. Probably once you install it, you'll want to install PSUG. That's a tool that can be used for running things under the system account. I have a button here on the UI of the script to open the print management tools of Windows. And if you have PSUG installed, it'll run the MMC as the system account, which has full control to all the redirected printers. So I have that button there to make it easier to see all the printers on the system, because it'll execute that under the system account. So we'll add that real quick. And then another thing that you might want to do when you use this script is install a CSV viewer, because there's a log file that it generates, and it might. I like to install the NurseSoft CSV viewer because it looks cool and it lets you sort things. If you go to options, you can set the path for PSUG and the CSV viewer that you want to use. Okay, so the script's set up and ready to go. By default, what the script will do is any redirected printer that's not using the Easy Print driver, it will rename it to the printer name dash the username of the machine. So we'll hit save to make it active, looks like. So I'll disconnect from the remote computer and remote back into it. One of the things that the script does is rename the printer to a name that's not going to change, because by default, the printer name is the printer name, and then it's redirected, and then it's the session number of the user that logs into the computer. And that session number is always changing whenever you log into the computer. So some programs, I know QuickBooks sometimes does this. If you're printing to a redirected printer, and you might have multiple profiles for printers. You might want to print invoices to a certain printer, and maybe like a sales receipt to another printer. If the redirected printer name is always changing, those settings don't get remembered. It's unique every time you log in. So with this script, if it changes the name to something that's consistent every time, then programs like that will work for remembering the printer settings. Sometimes the print UI, like the devices and printers, doesn't update, doesn't reflect the name. If we go in the notepad and look at the printer, it'll show the change name. So I'll just log off and log back in. That should probably make it show. Well, this one's not showing devices, but if we go in the notepad and look at that printer, it changed the name to the name of the printer dash administrator because that's the user. So that's the renaming function of the script, and now that does it by default. If we check the printer driver under give full access and log in, you'll see that what it does is it creates a local printer on the machine, and then it'll, if we look at the port of the redirected printer, the port is TS and then the session number. That changes with each session. So what the script does is it gets the port off the redirected printer and it assigns it to a new local printer on the machine. And when I was doing this, I found if I recreated the local printer, if you have UAC turned off, all the other users can see the local printers on the machine, even if they don't have security to it. So I found an attribute for the printer to make it so it has the same attributes as a redirected printer, so the users don't see it. And I also found that whenever you assign a TS port to a local printer, when the print spoiler restarts, it tears down that printer. Whenever it creates the new local printer, for the port, it sets it to COM1. So whenever the spoiler restarts, it has like a placeholder port for when it assigns the TS port over to it. So I'll show you what the recreation looks like. Okay, on the print queue, gave the user that's logged in, the administrator, manages printer access, and it copied the TS port over to the new queue. And if we go to configuration, you can see that the trays are accessible now. So now you have full access to the printer. You can, because by default, the user logging into the system doesn't have access to manage the printer. Some other things, I have the options box. That's where you can set your CS viewer, the PS exec. The way that it's running, it uses task scheduler. That's how the script gets executed. Whenever you run the exe, script after executing all the stuff, it creates some scheduled tasks on the machine. There's two tasks. I call the script printerceptor because it intercepts the printers, and it's like printers. So that the printerceptor is the main script that runs. Then there's this other script that runs that's used for isolating the printers. So whenever you create local machine, other users will be able to see it. So the first time it's created, other users might see it if UAC is off. The isolate, that's what goes through and it sets the attribute that hides it. So they might see it for a little while, but then this script will run at midnight as long as there's no users connected to it. Because if it runs while the users are, because it has to reset the spoiler to apply. So it's good that you can't do it when users are on it or it'll mess up the printing. So that's what that is. And that's how it runs. In the options, you can see if the task is running and you can disable it, enable it, run or end it. And I have like a timer built into it that checks the state of it so you can see how long it's running. And the script runs through with a certain amount of passes. If it detects a redirected printer on the machine, it increases the amount of time that it runs. Because I couldn't figure out a way to figure out when the redirected printer is done being created when you log in. Set the defaults. The settings are in the registry. That's how I keep track of the settings that are created. You can change the format of how the printer gets renamed. You can use the client name of the actual computer that you're using to log in. That might be useful if you have a bunch of machines and each user should have the same settings saved for the redirected printer. So you can just have one local printer on the machine that gets mapped with the settings when the user logs in. There's an event log. You can click on that and you can see all the operations the script is performing when you log in. So if we look at the log, you can see that every time we've logged in, there's a different TS port name. It keeps track of the port names. If it's a default printer, well, actually, these are multiple printers on the machine. These would be unique whenever you log in. You can see how long the script's running, so you can tune it to make it so it's not running so long. I have an option where you can limit the scope to a certain amount of users because you might not want to rename it for all the users on this system. You can set it to be limited. There's also advanced policies that you can create that does a bunch of other stuff. Like if you have a bunch of local users logging into the machine on the network and they have a redirected printer, but you want to change it to just a local printer already on the machine, you can create a policy to set if the redirected printer is the default printer, you can have it delete that printer and then move it over to another printer on the system. Or you could just use the advanced policy to do granular things if you don't want to scope it for all the users. I could probably talk about it all night. Do you guys want to see something or do you have questions about it? Do you want to see the code or anything?
Yeah, that's actually.
Yeah, I was. Oh, sorry.
No, is this an application you install on the terminal server or on the client machine?
On the terminal server.
Okay.
Can you repeat the question just so everyone can?
Oh, he asked if the script was something that would run on the client machine or if it would be something that runs on the server, and it's something that would run on the server. Okay, I'll show you some code.
Yeah, my question was
You
gonna.
have just a few quick gems.
What's that?
I was just gonna ask what the like, is it WPF? Is it Windows Form?
Oh, how it was created.
Yeah, how
It's in PowerShell. Like,
right, but how did you like come up with the GUI? Like, did you have to like draw each button and everything? Or?
It took a long time. I'll show you.
Windows Forms.
It's like 30,000 lines.
Really, somebody's got a Windows Forms PowerShell. So you can use Visual Studio just to draw.
There are some options.
Yeah.
Well, I did it all by hand. It took a really long time.
Sapien, our sponsor,
Yeah, I didn't use
has
that.
PowerShell Studio, which will create a Windows form for you. That somehow they're doing some black magic that dynamically resizes the screen. So the big downfall with Windows forms is that if you're on a screen with like more than 100% DPI, your buttons and stuff will look weird, and your text and stuff won't scale correctly. So there's some community-oriented things that will write Windows presentation framework for WPF forms that dynamically resize and handle it a lot better. I forget what the language that's written in. It's some offshoot of XML.
So Zach, maybe if you just want to maybe point out like maybe your favorite part or maybe the most challenging part of the code.
Well,
Maybe where you might need some help. We maybe just have a couple minutes.
yeah, okay. All of the code, my stuff, like a majority of it is buttons and things for manipulating the UI.
Yeah.
That's the majority of it. I did it all by hand, like playing with the positions of the forms, like reloading it a bunch of times to get everything lined up. I think PowerShell was really useful for this because I didn't know how I was going to do a lot of the things. I played a lot with different attributes of the printers to make it work well, like the hide things, and it was useful to do it in PowerShell because I just kind of threw everything together. I didn't really know how everything was going to end up, I guess. One thing I need help with, the list box for the titles. I couldn't figure out how to make this part of it adjust to like the amount of text on it, have it set to a set size. Does anyone know how to like make that so it takes up the full list box?
I would do a length of each one of the drivers that you add, and then store what your longest one is, and then size it to something a little bit longer than that.
I'd rather it so it doesn't like so you don't see the separation. I kind of just want it to be the whole thing.
Oh, you don't want the separator there at all.
Yeah.
Is that part of the other chooser to get that separator?
Yeah, that's the type of control that you have there. That's its option. It's like a grid view.
Yeah.
So you need to switch to a different type of control.
I think I have it set that way because there's checkboxes on there. I think it
Well, you can do a group control and then inject your boxes in there.
Okay.
Put an issue out on GitHub for it, and Chris will submit a pull request.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I see you already have one issue out there.
Yeah, I might have posted that. There's a bunch of issues on it that I fixed. There's a lot of people that don't speak English that use the script, and the redirected printer name, like redirected, is in their native language, so the script doesn't work with that. So I have a regular expression box that has some of the language for some of the people that posted issues, and you can create your own regular expression. I went through some of the languages. I had to install the language pack and then set the default system language to their language to figure out what it was. Does anyone have any ideas of how I could automate that to go through all the languages and like make a list for like all the expressions?
I haven't had to do multi-language
Okay.
stuff.
They're just gonna have to do it themselves.
Yeah, right.
But I think a lot of the issues posted are people that don't speak English fluently. Because I have some documentation up there, and it's kind of a simple goal of the script, but there's a UI, and the installer automatically installs it. So I try to make it as easy as possible. I don't know. I think I'm kind of crazy for trying to fix this issue. I spent like weeks on it. I should have just told him to suck it and don't use your trays. All right, so does anyone else have any questions or want to see anything else?
Link to the GitHub on our Twitter feed, so go check it out. Thanks a lot, Zach.
Thank you.
All right, I think internet people, I'm gonna switch over to being me now, maybe not, we'll see. I think that works, and then where am I? Let's switch to me. I'm presenting to everyone, that seems reasonable. Or like a terrible idea, whichever way you wanna look at it. Get rid of that, we'll get rid of that. We'll get rid of that. All right, so there's that.
I think it's still on your webcam.
Didn't switch to. It says I'm presenting. Oh, maybe I gotta find. Screen share. How about that? How about something like that? Woohoo! And can they hear me, I guess?
I can see your audio meter, so.
That's usually a good sign.
Yep.
All right. Well, then I guess we'll jump in here and get started, guys. So thank you, everyone, for having me. Thank you, Internet, for showing up. Appreciate that. Working through all of our technical issues is always good. So, and Zach, good job with your chat through your pretty cool printer stuff. It's been a long time since I had to manage printers, and I'm very thankful for that because I don't miss printer management at all. All right, so let's see. Let's press this button so I can go over here. Nope, probably not it. How about this one? Okay. So for those of you I haven't met before, and I know I've seen about half of you or so before, my name is Shane Young. I've been a SharePoint MVP for, I don't know, I think it's 13 years now. They keep changing like when my renewal happens, so I kind of have a hard time counting anymore, but let's just say it's been a long time. And so what we thought today, Matt had me in here to talk to you guys. We're just going to talk about PowerShell for SharePoint Online. So, and a little bit of Office 365, kind of intermix them. But, you guys clearly from the previous presentation know a lot more about PowerShell than I do. So hopefully I can just help fill in some of the pieces around what you would do with SharePoint, how to get that up and running the first time, and all that fun stuff. So I work for a company called Bold Zebras, do pretty much consulting, which I'm guessing most of you are probably also consultants, so it's pretty normal.
How many consultants in the room?
None of you.
I was going to say, I don't think there's too many, maybe one or two.
All right, well, usually I go to user groups, it's all about consultants, so what do you guys all do then? What is this, a bunch of system admins for various companies, is that fair?
We got a couple instructors.
All right.
There's admin folks, yeah.
Yeah, lots of sysadmins, lots of people in the trenches.
Cool. Sysadmins are my favorite people, right? Because you're the ones that should be learning PowerShell, and sometimes you're the hardest group to convince to learn PowerShell. So the fact you guys are here, I don't have to sell you on that. And I guess, and so my history, right? That's where I started. I was a network systems admin for about 600 desktops and a dozen servers, right? Remember those big giant things we used to have? They weren't these cute little blades back then. I just kind of moved along the charts there over the years, and somehow I got into SharePoint. Somehow SharePoint led me to the cloud, and cloud led me to PowerShell. So that's kind of how I ended up here. So I'm out on Twitter at Shane's Cows. I've got a YouTube channel where I cover lots and lots of PowerShell stuff. Once again, PowerShell stuff you guys probably already know, but if you've got people who are coming and saying, hey, how do I get started with PowerShell? How do I learn about arrays, or how do I use for each object or something like that? Those are the type of videos I make a lot of out there on the my YouTube channel. So I don't do the complicated, crazy stuff because honestly, there's not a lot of people interested in that, right? I have a video that goes over get help, get command, get alias, get member, and a couple other things. has 150,000 views. So, you know, anytime that you think, man, everyone already knows all that stuff, it's not the case, right? You're the 1% when you know all that stuff. So you have to remember that when you're talking to someone new about PowerShell, that they really have to start with get help and get help-examples and how all that stuff works. So kind of my reminder to you guys as a bunch of gurus is when you're helping people, you gotta turn it down. Yeah, so that's enough about me. So the agenda, firstly, I hate agenda slides. I think that's the most important part of this slide. But we're just going to kind of work our way through PowerShell from the context of SharePoint. We're also going to talk about the patterns and practices PowerShell because I think that's important to understand because if you're doing anything with SharePoint, especially SharePoint Online, you know, it's all about using the patterns and practices PowerShell from that group. And really what you're going to find out is a lot of that is CSOM underneath the covers, right? CSOM, if you're not familiar with it, it's a client-side object model. And so in the SharePoint space, we end up doing a lot of client-side object model stuff because as Microsoft has moved from SharePoint on-prem to SharePoint in the cloud, they really don't like us doing things on their servers anymore. So they've got a bunch of client-side object model APIs available to us, and so we end up writing a bunch of fancy code to go against those APIs. So how many of you guys are doing something with SharePoint in some capacity? All right, 2 of you, 3 of you. Mike doesn't count. Okay, fair enough. Well, the good news is it's the same way that I think PowerShell is super important. I think Office 365 is super important, right? It is becoming the center of the universe. And you can tell me all day long how your company's never going to use Office 365. It's not a thing. It's not important. I can tell you that the number of accounts in Azure AD just keeps going up exponentially every single month. Everyone who said they would never go to Office 365, it turns out they need that one little thing. And the first thing they need requires them to get accounts out there. So they end up populating Azure AD. And then once they're like, oh, I'm out here. Look at all this cool stuff I can do now. And it just snowballs. So even if you don't think the cloud's ever going to happen, and I mean, I've done it with government agencies. I've done it with banks and top secret stuff. It's coming, and it's coming fast. So the more you guys learn about that stuff, I think the better off you'll be. I sound like I'm in a SharePoint user group meeting, not a PowerShell user group meeting. What are you doing? Okay, so jumping into PowerShell, because that's what you really want to talk about. So if you want to work against Office 365, there are a handful of things that you need to install. And so this slide says 4. It'll end up being more than 4 when we're all said and done. The first thing you install, though, is the sign-in assistant. And so that's just a little utility almost, right? And it's like 2012 or something. It's really old. But all it does is helps PowerShell bridge the gap of authenticating against SharePoint Online, right? Because SharePoint Online's got you know, that nice little form-based authentication. And so the sign-in assistant helps there. Then we're going to install the Azure Active Directory module. That one's from 2016. But that is going to allow you to manage the users. So you go out to Office Online, and you know, turns out when you create a Office 365 user, it's really an Azure AD user. And so that's going to allow you to manage those Azure AD users and do all the things you need to do with that. And that could be something for SharePoint. That could be something like Exchange. You know, a lot of people, that's the first steps putting their Exchange mailboxes out there. And so managing the Exchange mailboxes, we're going to talk about that. But we're also going to see that like the licensing to what features show up, that's all managed through their online user. We're going to put a SharePoint Online module out there. It's pretty new. They kind of keep updating it. As we look at that a little more, though, we're going to realize that it's mostly worthless. Really no candy sugarcoating it. So we'll talk about how to get it on there, and I'll tell you that I've literally couldn't tell you the last time I used it, which is weird. Yes, sir.
What's the best way to find how to install this stuff? Because I was installing the modules on someone's computer today. It took me forever to figure out like what I actually needed.
God bless you, sir. So his question was, what is the best way to figure out how to install all this stuff? Well, Microsoft had a great site that had all the step-by-step documentation, and the contract for that ran out and the website went away. So someone, your favorite PowerShell YouTube celebrity, has made a video that will walk you through all of that. It is a little stuff, but he asked the question. I'm sorry? Oh, there you go. It's $697. Anyway, No, so I joke, but so I have a video that'll walk you through step by step how to do it. I also, are you guys familiar with Petri.com?
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So I've also written an article out on Petri that'll walk you through if you prefer the written version of it with all the links. But so that's the only place I can point you to at this point is my 2 pieces of documentation. So good question. So then we're also going to install the Skype for Business online module, and we'll make fun of that guy in a little bit as well. But we'll notice we don't have to install anything for Exchange, and that's because with Exchange, we actually do remoting. So they didn't bother to give us Exchange online commands to install locally. We just remote to their Exchange servers and run the command. It's one of the few cases.
So I was managing Exchange.
Mhm.
I just need to install the Azure Active Directory module for that, because I think that's what I did.
So to,
And I wrote it in, like you were saying. That's like all I need, right?
yeah, so Zach's question is, hey, he wants to do the Exchange stuff only. So in that case, I would put the sign-in assistant on, which you probably don't need, but I would put it on anyway because it's about that big. And then, yeah, you could use the Azure Active Directory module for managing the users, their licenses, and that type of stuff. And then, yes, you just end up remoting into Exchange. And so I'll show you the syntax for that, which you found out. But, yeah. And then what's weird about that, though, so you're like, hey, all right, I'm remoting to an Exchange server. I should be able to do all the Exchange-y things I'm used to being able to do. They've actually taken away some of the Exchange commandlets for the Exchange online servers. And it's the commandlets that you want, like backup PST or backup mailbox, right? That commandlet's not there. There's no way to back up and get your stuff out of there. Coincidence? I don't know. But it can be a little frustrating. If you're used to managing Exchange on-prem with PowerShell, the commandlets out there are slightly different. All right, so those are the 4 things I used to tell you. Up and coming, so back to your managing the users question. So we talked about I have you install the one module. There's actually a new module they've just released here in the last few months that is for managing the AD users going forward. So they're trying to phase out the old MSO or MS Online module and get to this module. Right now, we actually need both. So some of the things like with groups, if you're familiar with Office 365 groups, those have to be managed using this particular commandlets. So you might want to add that to your stuff. Also, anybody using Microsoft Teams? Really?
Yeah, Teams.
That's awesome. I was expecting crickets on that one.
We're replacing Skype for Business.
Yeah, not really replacing Skype for Business, right? Because Skype's going into Teams.
Right.
So
So what's it going to be called? Teams?
Teams?
So it went from it actually went from OCS Live to Link to Skype, and now it's going to go to Teams.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is the executable actually going to change?
But there is one difference. It's finally a new executable.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there is going to still be one more release of Skype for Business server on-prem because they haven't gotten all the PTSN stuff into the team stuff. So there'll be one more on-prem version.
And I guess that's why some of the hacks that we used to do in the registry don't work with Skype anymore.
Yep, they keep changing it on you. Right, and then you get into Skype for Business versus Skype for Pleasure, but that becomes an awkward conversation. So just exactly. Once it's after 5 o'clock, I'm allowed to have the After Dark show, right? I've wanted one for years. Anyway, if you're using Teams, just in the last couple of weeks, they released PowerShell commandlets to work with Teams. So the good news is this team is use the newer method, right? So you just type in install-module Microsoft Teams. There's none of the downloads or any of the funny installers. Okay, but before you can use this, and some of this stuff as PowerShell pros might make you cringe, but to do all those fancy things, you have to be able to run PowerShell as administrator, right? The good old right-click on the PowerShell icon, run as administrator. The SharePoint or the Office 365 Microsoft PowerShell commandlets won't work without it. It's very annoying, but it is what it is. You also have to be an Office 365 global administrator, which is usually a deal breaker for a lot of people. You know, they've not gotten into levels of access or not, but keep that in mind.
Now, when I work for just in time, elevations, so you can request elevated permissions.
I haven't tried. So this question is, will it work in just-in-time elevated permissions? I haven't tried, so I'm not positive there. Your execution policy needs to be set to remote signed. That's one of those ones that, a lot of people who are new to PowerShell trip over, because depending on your OS, some of them ship with remote signed, some of them ship as restricted. So sometimes you have to update that. Also, I think you should be running PowerShell 5.1 or later, but PowerShell 3 or later is required. Guessing no one in here is still running PowerShell 2. Anybody using PowerShell 6 yet? You mess with that? Well, yeah, I just haven't. I've skipped the beta for that. I don't know. I haven't felt like messing with it yet. If you need to get 5.1 on your Windows desktop or PS Readline because you're not on Windows 10 yet, another one of those great videos out there. So be sure to click the ads while you're watching the videos too. I would never say that. That'd be inappropriate. All right. So one of the fun things about all of this, especially for me and the people I talk to, is you got to manage passwords, right? Because the first thing you do, you got to connect to SharePoint Online or Exchange Online. And for most of the time, I end up seeing their old password right there in their script, right? Username equals blah, password equals blah, convert to secure string, off and going. So that works. It's completely doable. I discourage it. So instead, I've got a couple different methods. So you can do annoying but secure, right? $myaccount equals get credentials. Go that route. You can use an encrypted file. So there's a nice little blog post there from Todd on using what is that, CLI XML or whatever to and only you can use for your user profile. But it works. But what I've taken to doing is using Windows credentials, right? So there's a credential manager built into Windows, and out on Codeplex, I believe, or one of those online repositories, there is some PowerShell commandlets called Credential Manager. And so you can use those to pull credentials out of the Windows Credential Manager. So I just manage it through Windows Credential, and then in PowerShell, I can use, get Windows Credential, and then I can work with my credentials that way. So it's a pretty good little hack I kind of come up with along the way.
From a .NET developer also, secure string is not secure. Google it, and it's a very short routine that you can run in PowerShell to reverse any secure strings for password.
Oh, I found that when you do that for SharePoint on a secure store.
I'm sorry?
SharePoint secure store we used to do credentials.
Yep.
You run that whole routine against secure store without the password.
Yep. Yeah.
So
It's a hash password.
at the end of your script, make certain that you remove the variable, you reinitialize the variable with another value, and don't store secure passwords in a file.
Yep. So the nice thing is, use Windows Credential Manager, avoid all of that. Yes.
We have a partner portal that has a bunch of tenants in it for managing like other people's Office 365. Is it possible to switch to a specific tenant through PowerShell and execute commands? Because I tried doing that before and I didn't think it was possible.
Yeah, so his question is, he's managing a bunch of tenants. How would he be able to switch contexts? So by the time we're done here, what I would generally do is connect -PNP online and then the credentials for that tenant and their URL, and it's going to jump. And so in my PowerShell, without opening or closing the windows, it's just whatever tenant I've connected to last using that commandlet's going to get me in there. So you shouldn't have to, switching should be real easy.
If I'm logged in as my account that has the tenants in there, or you're saying I have to log in?
No, so you got your PowerShell window open, right? And so to connect to their SharePoint Online environment, you're going to run a commandlet, connect PNP online -their URL -the credentials for their URL. So that one string is what controls what context. So it doesn't matter who you're logged in the PC as or any of that. It's really just whatever you pass in that one line.
Okay, but I got to pass in the credentials specifically for that tenant.
Yes, you'd have to pass the credentials for that tenant. Or if you're using like Credential Manager, what I'll show you is that you would just you can just say use client 1's credentials or use client 2's, assuming they're already all stored in your Credential Manager.
Because right now we document the global admin credential for all of our tenants. So whenever we manage it, we have to go in and get the credentials and log in as them. Most of the stuff can be done through the partner portal, like through the UI. So we just like switch over to the tenant, and then we're cool. Until you have to do something in PowerShell, you can't do from the UI. You have to log in. It takes I do it like all day. It's like all I do is just log in.
Yeah, so you should just be able to run the one line in PowerShell and jump to their tenant without having to log out or log in, right? It should take you seconds.
So I have to pass in their credentials.
Yes, well, you have to pass their
So
credentials.
I gotta do something like what you're saying, like store the credential on the machine.
Yes. Or, yeah, I mean, you store it in your machine or, you know,
Someplace secure.
somewhere secure, yeah. And hopefully that'll make more sense as we kind of get through more of this. Yeah, so there's an example of one of the lines, right? So this is the connected to MS Online service. This is the one for managing users. It's just connected MSOL service and then dash credential and then the account and then get MSL user, right? And so if we switch over to the ISE, wherever it is.
Shane, what happens if your credentials are attached to one or more?
So for MS Online, can you have a go? Yeah, you can. I don't.
The reason I ask because I have a VPN in 3 different Azure AD tenants that run 365. I have interesting issues when I run some sort of that.
Yeah, I don't know what that would do if you, in that case.
That is supported severe. How's that work?
Why not? Because I'm a Spark Global Admin. Hey, the idea is Global Admin on the tenant.
But you're not using your tenant account.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm using my VPN, which has been granted GA in their tenant.
Okay, that gets interesting.
I'm not part of their directive.
Oh, okay.
When I tech stuff, I make sure to specify tenant ID.
Well, it had to specify tenant ID. 365 and MSOL is not quite that advanced.
Yeah, I don't know what that command would do.
Azure doesn't require you to specify.
No.
I didn't break the.
It looks like it's,
I think I can't
Were
think
you
I did.
sharing a specific app?
I wasn't, but I think it
that's
thought I
what
had.
see.
I think it thought I had 2 monitors and now I don't. So let's try this. Yes. Woo. All right.
You've entered the matrix, you're good.
Okay. Okay. So here in the ISE, we can just take a look at this. And so get stored credentials is what I'm using here, right? That's that third-party PowerShell that I pulled down. And so it's getting out of my Windows Credential Manager. I probably shouldn't be showing you guys this. I'm probably showing you all my secrets. But so here in Credential Manager, you can see I just have a generic credentials called Office 365. There's my username. My password is thankfully starred out, so you guys can't do bad things to me. But so by putting this in here manually, right, then I can just use get store credentials and put that in a credential object, and then connect MSOL service credential manage creds, right? We'll run that. Oh, it would help if I ran this line first. So we'll run that line. So it puts it in there. We'll run this line to connect. And then we can do something like get MSOL user. And so then you can see, yay, there's all my users. And so the main thing I end up using this commandlet for is it's the licensing challenge, you know, especially in environments where we've got thousands of users and, you know, everyone's got a slightly different license. And the trick there really is to go manually set someone's license in the browser the way you want it, and then do a get MSL user and then look at their license properties. And then you can copy their license properties to that new user you're creating that you want to have specific permissions. So that is the MS Online stuff. Let's see. Next. Let's just look at our friend PowerShell and ask him what he wants us to look. All right. So here was an example. Might be a little hard to see, but this is a great example of a bad idea. All right, so my buddy Todd was trying to change his passwords for all the accounts in his tenant, and so he did get MSL user and then set MSL user password and new password is pass that word too. Turns out this command works very effective.
That's what it.
It did exactly what it was supposed to do. The problem is that he was syncing from on-prem, and so it went and changed all of his on-prem accounts, right, and the sync account, and then it broke everything. So he just thought it was going to change just the generic users that he wanted it to change. Turns out, get an NSL user, got all the users, and changed all the passwords very effectively. So be careful what you ask for sometimes. Nope, it just ran. Right, so Todd's the same one. Back when Todd and I were learning PowerShell, we kind of went through learning PowerShell and all the stages of grief for that together a long time ago. What was that, 2009, I think? We used to struggle, I still do really, honestly. I struggle with the equal sign versus -EQ. And so in one of his SharePoint forms, he said, get the database where database name equals, with an equal sign, SharePoint config. Yep, without a bat and an eye, SharePoint or PowerShell renamed every database in his farm to SharePoint_config. It breaks pretty good, and there's really no fixing at that point. So I'm sure you guys have all had your horror stories of equal signs versus -EQ. And so this was the same thing. Todd didn't really think about what he was asking. It did what he asked. Didn't like it. All right, so connecting to SharePoint Online. So we'll just switch over to the ISE again. So this one's pretty straightforward, right? Connect to SPO service, your URL. And so then the only tricky thing here is that you have to do the -admin, right? So company-admin.sharepoint.com and then pass it in your credentials. And so then once we do that, it's thinking about it, right? Then we can do something like get SPO site and be like, yay, right? I always do like those type of commandlets just to make sure that I really did get connected. We all know PowerShell sometimes. If it doesn't like what you asked, it just kind of skips over it. And so I just always do a get like afterwards to make sure. With this, right, then we can do, I showed off my fanciness. We can see that there are 90 commandlets. First time I did this talk, there was 32 of them. So they've really upped their game. Kind of.
Now, does that vary based on the tenant that you're assigned to, or some tenants older than others?
No. So that number of commandlets is based on the package that I downloaded and installed a few slides ago. So okay. we all get 90 commandlets, unfortunately. Yeah. So then next we're going to look at connecting to Skype for Business. And so this is where it's a great to understand what Jim pointed out earlier, right? It's been Skype for Business. It's been communication server. It's been Office communication server. It's been live server, right? It's had all these different names. And the reason that's important is as you work through the commandlets for this, you're going to see it's a new CS online session, right? And then when you get inside there, you'll see references to OCS still. So, yeah. Now, one important thing to note here, though, Skype's kind of one of those oddballs. You have to install some Skype components, but then after you install the Skype components, you actually end up remoting into one of their server sessions. Why the hell do you have to install Skype components to begin with? Don't really understand. When you remote in, you'll see the module drop in, and then that module provides all the commandlets they're giving you. Something to keep in mind also, those are because you are a bunch of company people, you can only have 3 of those remote sessions in any given time. And so you have to wait on those to time out if you don't remember to remove your session. So getting that good hygiene of, create a session, import it, do what you got to do with Skype Online, and then remove your session when you're done just to avoid locking anyone else out. I've never known anyone to actually have that problem, but it's in the documentation, so I feel compelled to tell you. If we look at Exchange, we'll just skip, I know it's what the next slide is. It's the same exact thing. The only thing with Exchange is new PS session configuration Exchange. I mean, it's a giant URL or a string, and this URL is not, I hate the ISE. The ISE was never meant to be presented from. This URL is the same for all of us. So you do not, remember the SharePoint command I told you how to put in your specific URL with this particular guy with the Exchange stuff, you do not. You're just going there straight to their server. Right, credentials, authentication, allow redirection, blah, 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 blah. But the Exchange stuff is really cool because they've got the most commandlets. They've been doing PowerShell the longest, and they've done the best job of it. such a good job, like I mentioned earlier, they've taken away commandlets from us that we'd like to have. So it's good. It's good to manage. You talked about you needed it today just to manage someone, so it's good you have some experience with it. And it'll do all the things you want other than back up and get your mailboxes off of Exchange Online. So, all right, so that's the Exchange stuff. Let's see. So that was Exchange. Oh, look at that. Your question earlier, video that shows you how to do all that in a bag of chips. I have made it. All right, so this one's very important. Useful things you can do with all that now that you've installed all that in SharePoint. This slide was intentionally left blank. There's just not a lot that those commandlets will do, right? The 90 that they give us, they're for very specific functions that are usually new and usually really weird, bizarre scenarios. Like one of the neat things about SharePoint Online now is you can have like data sovereignty finally. So if you got to keep all your data in a German data center, you can say this user's data lives in Germany's data center, for example. So there's no GUI for any of that. So that's only got PowerShell at this point. So that's one of the few things you can do via the PowerShell. Can you move a user from one sovereignty to another? I haven't messed with any of it, but my understanding is that when you set it, you set a user to a specific one that, yes, it goes and moves them and puts them into that data center. I've not messed with it. I'm far from an expert on it, but my understanding is they.
I'm just curious if you move users from North America to GDR, for example.
Yeah, because what happens, right, is everyone gets created where you originally start. So their user got created in North America if you started here, and then yeah, so it's going to have to get moved to Germany or whoever it might be.
Test, because I think it just creates a new OneDrive form. I don't think it moves the content.
No.
That all goes to the e-discovery discussion, because if you're in GDR, for example, and they don't permit e-discovery, and you try to run e-discovery on North America, 365 has got a GDR user, what happens?
Yeah, those are scenarios I am not qualified to speak to, but I am certain that those questions have been asked and answered because that's what they're trying to fix, right? They're trying to get ahead of all of that chaos.
Now, if you had a developer hat that you could wear every once in a while, you can do all kinds of things from that original library. You know.
Okay,
you could, but the good news is I spend a lot of time doing things on SharePoint Online with PowerShell. It's a big part of my job. So there is a better way, and that is the Patterns and Practices PowerShell. So if you guys aren't familiar with the Patterns and Practices team, well, it's probably because you're not SharePoint people. But the Patterns and Practices team is a group of, originally is a group of Microsoft consultants who's kind of grown out to a community-driven group as well. But they write a lot of here's the best practices for doing X or Y inside of SharePoint Online. So migrations and the way to do branding, way to do templating, all of the really cool developer stuff at this point, these guys are the ones that are writing the code and writing all the best practice guides to do it. One of the byproducts of all that work is they've made available to us a version of PowerShell called the Patterns and Practices PowerShell for SharePoint. And so that PowerShell is really the center of your universe. And if you have to actually manage SharePoint Online, that's the PowerShell you're going to want to use. If you're managing SharePoint on-prem, they have a version for on-prem as well.
And just one note, when we think about PowerShell practices, there's a lot of Azure, 365 on-prem. Those are what's supported scenarios.
Yes, yeah, they're absolutely the supported scenarios. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And the nice thing also about this stuff, so the Patterns and Practices group, I'll brag on them a little more. So it's really going to do a bunch of CSOM, client-side object model stuff for you behind the scenes, right? It's hitting Office 365 APIs to do their work. They don't have any special hooks. They don't have any special access. They're using publicly available hooks to do everything. And so the neat thing about that is they're also logging all the PnP usage. And so they're actually generating over 1 billion, that's B, right, billion, hits a month using their commandlets and their tools against Office 365, or SharePoint Online more specifically. So it's highly used, as Jim said, right, it's a supported way of doing things. So, okay, so to install the PnP, nice thing also here is it is our good friend, right, install module. So install module, SharePoint PNP PowerShell Online. Yes to the PowerShell gallery warning, and then yes, you trust this crazy module you just downloaded off the internet. Pretty straightforward to install. Upgrading it, sometimes they release a new version monthly. I think you heard Mike mention that earlier. That new version can sometimes be a pain in the butt to get on, and so I have ran into a lot of customers end up with like versions on top of versions, but it's all fixable. You guys are really smart at PowerShell, so you'll be able to handle all that pretty well, I think. But there's also an MSI version, but who the heck wants to install via an MSI if there's install-module? But so once you get in there, what you're going to find out is they have all the commandlets to do real work, right? So we talked about the ones that Microsoft gave us natively, let you do weird things like set users, regions, so they're data privacy things. Blah, blah, blah. It's a one-time deal. No one cares. With the PNP stuff, this is where I can actually do things at scale, right? I need to create 100 lists for all my customers and put 10,000 items in there. No problem. I can write a PowerShell script to do that, right? The PNP stuff is what lets all your skills actually start to shine around content creation, content manipulation. The biggest PowerShell script I ever wrote is like 400 lines of PowerShell to take an on-prem file share and migrate it to SharePoint Online, right? And it was once I got the PNP commandlets for things like add PNP file, I was like, all right, I got it, right? I know how to get a file off the file system. I know how to look at the create date and the owner and all that, right? Get access control, pull all the information, bundle it up, and then write it out to SharePoint and iterate through an entire file share, right? These commandlets are what lets you guys do what you know how to do, but against the SharePoint environment. All right, it's more specifically a SharePoint Online one. So what I've got here, so we probably won't run this. I mean, we can, but we can kind of just talk you through some of the stuff here just so you can see. And if you're not too familiar, I realize most of you aren't familiar with SharePoint, so maybe we won't spend too much time here. But you can just kind of see, I worked through this in a progression that I would, typically write any other code in, right? And so in this example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 lists. I'm going to create a bunch of dummy content, and I'm going to move all the dummy content from one list to the other based on a metadata field. Just it's more to prove I can do something. It was actually a customer request, but this is kind of generic version of it. So, there's a command for new lists. And there's a command to get the list, and then add a field. So that's add columns of metadata inside of SharePoint. You have to account for things like display name versus internal name. We're going to add to a view. Yay, easy stuff. Add 10 items to the list. I1, I less than 10, I++. You guys have probably done this before. One of the neat tricks here, though, was for my color column. If you've never used get random, that's a handy little commandlet. So I said here, get random, here's your input, blue, red. And so then, PowerShell just kind of picked for me. That's how I randomized my data. And I did the same thing, get random for dog, cow, horse, and zebra. I have no idea, just did. So that's a handy one if you don't know it. So then what I do, I made a second list, my horse list. And so then we said, all right, get items where PNP item, and I had to write a camel query. Maybe you had to write camel before. It's disgusting. Don't ever have to do that, I hope for you. But I wrote a camel query that essentially got all the ones where the value was red, because that's what the commandlet was a camel query. And then for each item and items, add PNP list item, and I pulled the values over from the original target. And then once I got done with that, then I went through and then just for each object removed them.
Are you going to write a convert to camel syntax?
No way in hell. People have tried. People have done that stuff.
There are camel query creators.
Yes.
So you can point them to a live SharePoint, go click, click, click. I want to build this little cast this. Return just these 3 columns and do a line.
Yeah. So what I've learned to do is I'll go into the browser and create it, and I'll use PNP to get the object, look at the properties. There's my there's my camel. I might have to change it slightly, but it needs to be close. So this might, I don't know, maybe this is something you guys are pretty good at, but one of the questions that's come up with a lot of people recently for me has been the difference between for each and for each object. Are you guys all comfortable with that? I mean, I was surprised. I was talking to PowerShell who you would call a guru, and he knew how to use them differently, but he couldn't articulate the difference between for each and for each object, especially because an alias for each object is
For each.
for each. I mean, what an asshole thing of them to do, right? I mean, I don't know how else to put it. Who shipped it and said, let's have a for each statement and a for each alias that does something completely different?
That's like the PS custom object. There's a type accelerator for that, and then if you use like VS Code, it expands like system automation, PS custom object. They behave totally differently.
Right, they like to make it. They like to give us jobs. Yeah, little quirks. There you go.
Yeah.
I know you're using like add PNP those out.
Yep.
If you were to expand that command out, how many groups PowerShell commands does that convert into? Because you do that in native PowerShell and probably twice as many lines.
It's doing client-side object model web service calls.
Right, but how many of them are inside of that? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, so I mean,
What's the script look like behind the scenes?
Yeah.
so this,
Download it. It's out there.
yeah, so I mean, there's CSOM for it. That's probably 7 lines of CSOM, right? Because you got to create the get the object, create the object. I don't know. I really suck at CSOM, to be quite honest. I've written a bunch of it. I barely understand what I'm doing when I do it, though.
There's a reason why I only choose developers.
But this is an open source project. You can go out and you can contribute to it.
Yeah, it is on GitHub.
I
So.
have other contributions to do. So
They need documentation. Anybody who wants to write samples of documentation, please go contribute.
Yeah, so that's one example. That's my kind of base example I usually walk SharePoint people through, because that's a real life challenge we have, is moving content, working with content, that type of stuff. So then this script, so this is one of the craziest ones I had to write, but this one is going to let us go out and find all the workflows that are running in the environment, or in the SharePoint environment, and then find all the ones where the status is not completed, and then write all those back to a list. What's interesting about this one, though, was I actually had to use the SharePoint commandlets, the PNP commandlets, and CSOM all inside of one script, which once again is probably not news to you guys. You can kind of intermix all this stuff, but a lot of people that are new to this, it's kind of like, what do you mean? Those are kind of separate things. But they're not, right? A PowerShell script is just lines. It doesn't care what you're doing. Here you can see we hard-coded the password. And so before you make fun of me, what happened was, for this particular project, I was subbing for another consulting group. And essentially, I was going to have to pass this file to them, who was going to hand it to a customer who had no idea what PowerShell was, and they had to be able to fidget their way through this thing. So that's why it's so well documented, and things like, here's your password, buddy, just put it in here, because you're not smart enough to do it. Not smart enough, not the right word. Not experienced enough. So anyway, there you go, hard-coded password. So we had a CSV file that had all of the site collections listed in it. We had to do some URL fix up here. And then we got in, we connected. Right, and so that's back to Zach, you were asking earlier, right? So that's the line that we have to run this line over and over again, because every site we have to connect to each site collection one at a time. So I just keep running connect PNP online with a different site collection URL here in the credentials. So same thing for you, except you have different credentials. Check for master list and create. Okay, so I create a list, if not test. I'm thinking that's new to you. I created a list. I even did a try. This was my first ever try catch loop. So when you do CSOM, client-side object model with SharePoint, what you have to do is you have to add the DLLs for the server, the SharePoint server DLLs, to the session. So you end up adding type, right, and then the links off to specific DLLs. And what you can do, I documented it for them, but you just go out and you download the SharePoint 2016 SDK, and then I'll get the DLLs on your local machine, and that's how you add those in. So then this is the crazy CSOM stuff, right? So you create a client context, put the credentials, client contact, credentials equals credentials. Yay, we connected. here's my catch, that all broke. And so then if not client context, and so, right, jump back to your question. So then here we end up, building out the client context. Let's get the list, execute the query. And the reason I had to do all this is because there was no one else had ever written anything to get the workflow services manager. So then a new object, the workflow services manager. And really what I end up doing there is I end up going out to MSDN and looking at the C# examples on how do you get the workflow context manager, and then translating C# into PowerShell, and then translating C# into CSOM into PowerShell, right? I kind of have to do multi-steps. But essentially, with enough poking out there, I was able to figure out that client workflow services manager is what I wanted. And so then I hit the subscription service, I hit the instance service, and I think I put, okay, then for each list in the list that I got earlier, right up here, I went and got their subscriptions, loaded the context, and then for each workflow in the subscriptions, I wrote those back to a specific list if the value wasn't completed. Got some camel in there too, right? Really make this ugly. Yeah, this is one of the scripts like I look back on right now and I'm like, how in the hell did I ever write that? Because I barely understand what it does reading it with my documentation. I'm still kind of convinced at some point aliens just take over and write stuff for me, and they let me come back and I'm like, oh look, I wrote this stuff. I don't know.
You like black out at the keyboard and you wake up.
I do.
In the morning.
I was like 21 when I wrote this. When I write it in classic ASP, I wrote this whole like HR management system. And better way stuff. And I just wrote it. I'm like, I don't even understand. I literally don't know how I wrote it, other than I know that I wrote it because I was never a developer. So I don't know. Anyway, so this is just another one of those crazy examples of something there was no way to do in the UI, right? So we go and put these pieces together via PowerShell, and then I kind of mixed a bunch of PowerShell technologies in one fell swoop to make it do what it's got to do. So let's see if it's over in PowerPoint. I think we're about done. Yeah, so there's mention of CSOM, and that was the last slide. Yay! All right, so I've been rambling for a while now. Questions, comments, bad jokes? Yes, sir.
I got one. So I had to unfortunately I've had to hit SharePoint Online with some, scripting in the past, and it's a really difficult scripting topic. Probably SharePoint is as well. So I guess what I don't understand about it, and I'm not super familiar with SharePoint, which made it even more difficult, is why we need CSOM at all. Because what we're actually doing with CSOM is hitting like a REST API or web service, right? So what role does CSOM actually play in doing that, and why do we need it?
All right, so the question, right, I think boils down to is why do I need CSOM for SharePoint Online, right? Well, so that's the long answer. So the shorter answer is the CSOM, the APIs that we're hitting via CSOM are the same APIs that, like, if developers are writing custom web parts or custom code for SharePoint and deploying it, they're using those same API endpoints. So you don't necessarily have to do CSOM to do it, but that's kind of the poor man's way that's evolved from us non-developers to write SharePoint code. And then thankfully, the PMP team wrote a bunch of wrappers for a bunch of that CSOM, and that's where we get those things like add PMP file instead of the crazy context. But so CSOM is just a tool to work with those APIs. If you had other ways, if you want to write native C# to do it, you absolutely could.
Another way to say it is that RESTful web services are just web services. So you have to parse the JSON or the XML when you get it back. CSOM converts them into JavaScript or C# objects depending on which library you choose. So now you have an object-oriented approach. It is a SharePoint list object. I then set its properties, then I call update, and it will post back. If I do RESTful web services, I have to make the call to do to actually retrieve the web object, then I can add a new list object to it, write that back, then get that back as an object, and then start posting columns or fields to it. So it just lets you think of it as an object, as if you were server-side. The original goal was to help server-side developers move to client-side development. So if you're all comfortable with the RESTful web service API, go right ahead and use it. CSOM is just a wrapper for that.
Yeah, right, because it's so much easier for us, especially as PowerShell people, right? Get PMP file or get PMP list item returns a list object, right? It's got methods and properties. I mean, it's PowerShell. Like, yeah, I get this thing. Whereas it might point out, if not,
well, the objects returned by PMP are CSOM objects.
Yeah.
So it's just a wrapper to make that easier because the calls back and forth CSOM are weird. Because there's certain times that you can patch them, sometimes you can't. These PMP commands just make you, it helps you forget most of the CSOM. So.
Okay. Yeah, right. I mean, there's the crazy stuff Mike's talking about, right? So here's CSOM where I had to get the list item, and then you take that and you load it back, and you're in and out, in and out, in and out.
You're always messing with that context object all day long. Now it's still there, and you still have to kind of interact with it, but it's not nearly as obvious. The other cool thing about PMP is because it's going to the rest of the web services, it works just as well on-prem as it does in the cloud.
Yes. Yeah. Well, now also one of the downsides of PMP, because it is CSOM, and they're trying to make it as efficient as possible, like when we get a list item object back, it actually doesn't bring back the whole object. It only brings back certain portions of the object. And so that can be really maddening to us that are used to SharePoint on-prem PowerShell, where when I get an object, I get the whole damn thing back. But the PMP guys give me a dash includes where I can then say, get these other properties back. But once again, I got to kind of wrap my brain around that and be like, why isn't that there? The reason it's not there is because the native query doesn't get it. I have to do it. And then other things like iterating through collections and stuff can be a little bit different with the CSOM stuff, because if they didn't initialize it as a collection, if I bring it back and think I've got a collection, it's not an actual collection. So something like select star, select dash object star, for most of the objects doesn't work because they're not actually a collection of objects.
Yeah, I think I'd run into that in some of the scripting, and I would get like an object initialization error or something. So if you run into that, and you have ways around that?
Yeah, when I run into it, I have to beat my head on the keyboard for a few minutes. And then I have to think through, okay, what is it I'm really trying to do? And a lot of times what will happen is, so you can't do the select object star, but you can pipe it into a for each, objects in item. And then that will actually, then you can iterate and say, write dash host object, boom, 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 and it'll push it all out. So same thing, same concept, but for somehow the CSOM wrappers don't like it one direction, they like it the other. So I just learned to fight my way through it.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, PMP, God bless them, I love them. Greatest thing since sliced bread. But there are quirks that it makes it, because it is CSOM. That's what I'm always trying to remind you. It's CSOM, so it can be dumb, because whoever wrote that commandlet might not have been the guy who wrote the other commandlet that you got used to using. And so you're missing, he didn't include this, or he didn't package it that way. Update doesn't work on this one, but update works on that one.
Or another way to say it is welcome to open source.
There you go.
Is that PMP project on GitHub?
Yes, yeah, it's absolutely on GitHub.
Okay, cool.
Open source, and you're welcome to contribute.
Awesome.
Yeah, and it's written, right, so it's led by a Microsoft Premier Field Engineer, MCS guy, right, one of the smartest guys in the SharePoint planet, Vesa Wave, I'll never say his last name correctly, but Vesa. And then it's also, there's another guy, Erwin Van Hewen, he works on, he's not with Microsoft, but might as well be. So those guys kind of lead that project. And the other neat thing is, like we pointed out earlier, right, is it's fully supported, right? Microsoft's even starting to sign it as if the release that just came out today or yesterday, whenever it came out. But so everything they do is via best practice, fully supported. And if it's not doing something that's on the up and up, right, because they had to make a workaround for X or Y, SharePoint engineering team has blessed whatever crazy shenanigans they've done. So everything that's in there is 100% the real deal. And it's all open source.
And if you start doing with SharePoint and you run into Vesa, he's like, yeah, Putnam. what Vesta says. Just,
Yeah.
He's a principal consultant, which is one of the highest. I've actually done it. I can't have a conversation with you. Talk to me. It's too high.
He doesn't. Vesta's a good guy.
Oh, yeah.
We're Facebook friends. We make fun of people. Great. He's one of those ones where he's so smart. He gets a lot of these things. Hey, Vesta, how are you? My customer has this problem. Can you tell me how to fix it? Not his job. He's the consultant. But you're not. So. Yeah. All right. What other questions you guys got?
On-prem?
Yeah. So all of these are available for on-prem. So with on-prem, right, because they do have, let's say 200 PowerShell commands, no, 700, I don't know, they got a bunch of on-prem PowerShell commands that ship. They all work pretty well, so I don't generally need this. But I was on a project 2 weeks ago for a very large bank who wouldn't let me get on the server, so I couldn't do any SharePoint on-prem PowerShell. I put the PNP on my local machine, connect PNP online to the local URL. I was able to get around there. You can't do PowerShell. So yeah, the PNP, that's the main reason I use PNP on-prem is for things like, because I can't get to the server. The other thing that's neat about PNP, so on-prem PowerShell stops at the web object. So you can get a farm, you get a web app, you can get a site collection, you get a web, but you can't get a list or a list item. And so there's PNP items for getting lists and getting list items. So they go a little deeper as well.
How do you turn off the timeout whenever you connect to Microsoft Online? So there's a timeout, right? Because I put in my password all the time. That's
So like,
You mean your token expires and you have to put in your,
yeah,
you have to
so, like,
re-authenticate?
the connect MS online or whenever I import the session.
it's got its timeout.
Yeah, I'll like go Google something. By the time I figure out what I want to do, it asks for the password again.
That's weird. I mean, I leave mine connected for days at a time, and I don't have any of that.
I've had the same problem, typically with Exchange Online
Yeah.
and also with Skype. With Skype, you can set the session timeout to be a bit longer, but what I did find was it often wasn't an actual session timeout, particularly with Exchange Online. You may need to check out your Edge firewall. You would have issues with network devices killing connections as well. So, and at other times, I think there were just days when Exchange Online had some issues. So I could go months without seeing that issue, and then one day I'd see it a dozen times.
That can,
Look at it because it consistently happens.
Yeah, I've even had, I've left work one day with an Exchange Online session open, come in the next day and sit down and start typing commands in the store.
That's weird.
It's not intended to really shut off, but I have had those issues.
well, I think Exchange and Skype are supposed to time out because you have the 3 session limits, right? So in case you accidentally closed it, you want that session to go away on its own at some point. So I think those two do, but like with SharePoint, I mean, you can stay connected in perpetuity as far as I can tell. I've done it for weeks at a time. All right.
I will say Gerald's question earlier about like, hey, what's in the command behind, get PNP list or whatever. If you don't mind, can you type get command, then get just a little
So what,
PowerShell is in here. So you do a get command,
Oh.
get dash command,
yeah, maybe.
and then the name of the command. So get dash PNP list or whatever. And then pipe that to select dash expand property. Oh, select space. Definition. Oop, I don't, that won't
Yeah, multi-complete.
How rude.
And then just pipe that to your clipboard. So pipe to clip. And then you can paste that into a new window.
Is that a function, Jay?
What's that?
That command.
If it's a function, it'll work. Sorry, yeah.
If it's a commandlet, you'll get the syntax definition. If it's a function, you'll get the actual PowerShell code line.
So it's a compiled commandlet then.
These are written in C# using C some library.
But so anything that's a function, you can actually pull the definition is actually
I
the
think
code.
there are a couple of them that are functions. Most of them are compiled, but there are a couple of them that are.
So you can maybe do get command dash, there's a type.
Well, you can try all several hundred of them.
Command dash command type function. And see which ones are functions. None of them.
So expanding on that, the select expand property. I don't know if it works with expand property, but at least with the property parameter in PowerShell 6, I believe we're going to get tab completion on object properties in that command.
I think it has to be written correctly in order to be able to pull that out.
I believe the commands do have to, I believe if they use output type.
Output type.
Yeah. Then we'll be able to actually tab complete the properties of the pipeline object for the property parameter select object.
That's pretty cool.
Cool.
I think that was a multi-year request. On
Journey.
user voice or something.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, I guess we'll call it. I mean, it's only 7:52. You know. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Shane. You have like a gratuitous plug slide, where to find me.
That
was at the beginning.
Yeah.
Is there a way to find out how many people connected remotely?
There were peak like 11 viewers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what right now there's 7.
Good job, remote people. Now, so the easy way to find me, go to YouTube and type in PowerShell. Look at who's number 1.
Wow, you beat out Don.
Isn't that crazy?
Brags about that.
I do. I beat out Don. I beat out. So we were at Ignite, and I was gonna meet Snover. I was like, I don't know if he has a heart condition now. I'm gonna be like, yeah, I'm the jackass who's number 1 on PowerShell on YouTube. Yeah. Look at that. 153,000 people have watched that video in like a year, a little over a year. So just a reminder, right? If you're trying to learn how, or want to share stuff, beginner content is where it's at. There's always someone who has to learn the very core, right? It's crazy. All right.
I will say yours is 1 video and Don's is number 2 with 99 videos.
Yeah.
Well, but I have. All right. Let's see. Video manager. Where is my playlist? Let's see how. So my. It doesn't really tell us.
20 videos.
Oh, did you see it?
Yeah.
Ooh,
That's good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I make stupid stuff like how to use PowerShell for each and PowerShell array introductions, and the password stuff has been real popular. So it's a lot of fun.
Who needs Pluralsight when you're giving it all away for free?
And it's kind of my arguments. I don't know. Like Mike, I've been doing the training thing for forever now, and got a rhythm down to it. I know how to teach.
Cool. Well, Shane, thanks so much.
Thank you, guys.
Just a reminder before you close. Just a reminder, our meeting, next month, December 12th, to be determined. Usually in December, we try to do something fun, like scripting games, scripting puzzles. We did the 12 days of PowerShell, I think, 1 year. We do a year in review kind of thing, what we've learned here and kind of where we go next year. So if you want to be more involved in the user group or in user groups around, if you want to have input on the content that we do here, if you want to be a speaker, next month is a great to come to the user group and talk about that stuff. So
Yeah, bring your code, please. Stuff you've been working on, we'll walk it through with you, debug it, whatever. I don't know how you guys feel, but I thought it was pretty cool that Zach came up, showed what he was working on.
Yeah.
We can kind of work through it together. That's what we're here for, right?
awesome.
Cool. Well, I'll stop the broadcast and
Thank
bye,
you
Internet.
online, everyone.